So tonight we're back on this subject of grief. We're going to do tonight and then 2 more weeks. So we'll finish on our last night at Elam. But I wanted, as I've said, to do this series because I find most people in early recovery come into this predicament that they don't know what to do with. Number one, they don't want to feel anything. Then they start feeling stuff. And then they realize they're going to have to deal with all of the losses they've never dealt with before. But that scares them because they know it's going to be painful and they might relapse. And so they know they got to deal, they don't want to deal with it, they're afraid to deal with it, and it's a really difficult thing. So what I decided to do is to not get into the painful stuff until the last night, but just help you understand why this is an important topic. And then we spent the last 2 weeks looking at the unhealthy tools that were passed to you, either knowingly or unknowingly. They're taught and modeled for people growing up in complex trauma. And tonight and next week, I want to go to the positive tools for dealing with grief. So we're getting past the negative, looking at what the problem is, and tonight I want it to be constructive, something that you can learn and begin to apply. So what we're going to look at tonight is the fact that grieving is a process. So I've already got one more ahead there, Marie. Yeah. But to get you kind of in that, what I want you to think about is when we talk about grieving, we can think of the obvious losses. So somebody close to us dies, etc. And we're going to look at that, as I said, on the last night. But I thought I'd just get your brain working tonight as to some subtle losses that require grieving that you might not even be aware of. So a subtle loss is you lose something that used to be part of your life. So it's a mental ability, a physical ability, a possession, all of those things. Or you enter a phase of life that now brings with it limitations that are frustrating, limitations that you don't enjoy. So aging, believe it or not, is a loss. It's a very subtle loss. Your brain doesn't work as quickly as it used to. Your memory isn't as sharp as it used to. You don't have the energy that you used to. You can't do what you used to be able to do. And so there's limitations, and then you're tired all the time, you go to bed, you can't sleep. And so you get frustrated with all of that. So aging for many people is a grieving process. And especially, I think, for women, as their bodies change and they're not the sexy, hot commodity that they used to be. And that is a type of loss that they have to deal with. The next one is retirement. And so many people in our culture get their sense of value from what they do, not from who they are. And so if you ask them about themselves, they don't necessarily tell you about who they are, they tell you what they do. And that's what gives them purpose in life, that gives them a sense of having value in life, that keeps them busy in life. And so for many people when they retire, all of a sudden is, what value do I have? Who am I? And what do I do with all this time? And it is a loss that is very difficult for many to deal with. With that is parenting and children moving out of the home. Many parents, especially mothers it seems, get their sense of value and purpose from being a mom. And so when the children are gone and don't need them anymore, some try to keep the children needing them and they get to be a pain to the children. But then they go, who am I? What purpose and value do I have? And it's a grieving process that begins to happen. The next one is if you have a chronic illness or a mental illness, mental health issues. It puts limitations on you. You now live with depression, you live with anxiety, you live with a bad knee, a bad hip, a bad heart. All of those things are very frustrating and can really limit what you can do and how effective and productive you are. And so a lot of people struggle with that, especially if they get them while their children are young, because now they can't be the parent to their children that they wanted to be. And then the other one, and we're going to talk about it in the final week, but addiction is a severe limitation. You see all your friends having a drink or two and you can't. And you get frustrated by that. You don't want to admit that you're powerless or you're an alcoholic. And so you struggle with that. It's a loss that you have to grieve. So that's just to get you thinking. So now let's go to this practical, important thing to understand about grieving is that it's a process. And I mean a couple things by it. Number one, we all wish that we could grieve in a day. But grieving takes time. We don't like that because it requires sitting in some painful emotions, and we don't like doing that. And we want it to be done and to instantly feel better. So we have to understand it's a process. The second part of the process is that it looks different at different times. So you might have a time where you cry every day. You might have a time where you're just angry every day. You're still grieving. You're just at a different place in the grieving process. So what I want to do tonight is just go through that process with you. Hopefully you'll be able to understand some of your own grieving and why you've been the way you have. What we're going to see is it's not necessarily an order to this. I'm going to present it and list it as an order, but that doesn't mean you have to go through it in that order. You might go through it in a very different order. The second thing I want you to understand up front is that people from complex trauma or addicts tend to get stuck at different parts in this process. And we're going to understand why you get stuck there and hopefully give you the tools to get unstuck. So hopefully this gives you some insight. The other thing I want to say up front is the more important the thing was to you that you lost, the longer the process of getting over it seems to take. So the grieving process for some people can go up to 2 years, 3 years, depending on how precious the thing was that they lost. So number one, the first thing, and this is pretty much universal, as the starting point is there's a shock or a numbness that happens. So you hear that somebody has died and it hits you and you're like a deer in the headlights. You're stunned. You feel numb. And what's happening is your brain is in kind of disbelief. It can't quite get itself around that somebody's gone. And so you're in this state of shock. And that's because it takes your brain a little while to kind of get used to it, to accept it, to come to terms with it. And so this shock thing, you may have been at funerals or you may have been at a funeral yourself, and you look at the faces of those that have lost somebody and they're just like blank. There's just like there's nothing there. They're robots, they're going through the motions, and that's what they do. Now the reality with complex trauma is many addicts like the numb. They like the freeze feeling. They don't want to feel the pain, so they can get stuck here. And they can begin to say, I'm going to use or drink in order to stay numb. And I suspect many of you have been to funerals where people go to the funeral already drunk, or after the funeral, the first thing they do is get drunk, and they stay that way. They don't want to feel. But the reality is, you can never heal unless you feel. And that is a scary part, it's the difficult part, but it is a necessary part. So from that numb place, now you go to the second thing, and that's reality begins to gradually sink in. And what we're going to see is as it sinks in, it will affect you emotionally, it will affect you intellectually, and it will affect your behavior. So it affects every part of you. Intellect, emotions, body, actions. And so the first part for many people after reality sets in is the deep emotion of sadness. And it can be a heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching, mourning, crying, wailing, all of those things. It's a painful crying. It's a painful loss that begins to set in. And for some people, it can sink into depression. You can get to a point where you just get so sad you can't get out of it. You get stuck there. Now some people stay stuck there not so much because they're depressed, but because they are afraid to be happy again. Because they feel guilty if they get happy. They feel guilty if they laugh. Because in their mind, if they're laughing and having fun, that means they don't miss that person anymore. And so that must mean they didn't love them very much if they're now having a fun time. And so some people stay stuck because they feel guilty about ever having fun again. Some people go from depression to hopelessness. And it's a very difficult, stuck place. It is one of the worst places to go because some people, when they get to hopeless, it's like, I can't go on without this person, or life will never be as good without this person. So I'm trying to feel better, but I can't get over this, so I feel hopeless, and that leads some to suicidal type of thinking. What's the point? Let's just end it all. And then others stay stuck there because they slide into self-pity. Poor me, I lost somebody else, everybody's against me, the world's against me, life sucks, and they slide into this deep feeling sorry for self. So that's the first powerful emotion. With it, or after it, or back and forth comes the second powerful emotion, which is anger. And what I want you to understand is anger is actually a healthy response to loss. Because you are angry that you lost something that was so important to you. It feels wrong, you feel ripped off, it doesn't seem fair. And so anger is a natural thing. What I have found is a lot of people, if they get angry, they immediately get told they shouldn't be angry. And they get made to feel that they're bad for being angry. And they feel guilty for their anger. And so it's important to realize that anger is a natural thing. It is okay to express it and to get it out. But it is really, really easy to get stuck in the anger phase. And there's a bunch of different reasons why we get stuck. Number one is when I'm angry, I don't feel the pain of the loss. So anger kind of medicates my pain. And so I like anger. And then anger also gives me energy to do what I need to do to get through life and the sadness of it. And so I like to get angry, to get the energy and the adrenaline from it. And then for others, anger keeps people away. So they don't want people coming and hugging them and saying, we're so sorry. They just want to be angry, and that scares everybody and keeps them at a distance. So anger can serve a bunch of different purposes, and people can get stuck there for years. Now, it can go and be expressed in different ways. So some, when they're in the anger stage, they just start lashing out at everybody. And so you quickly realize, don't go within 20 feet of this person if you want to not get wounded. That's how angry they just lash out. They're mad at the world. And if you come into range, you will get their anger. Some turn their anger at God, and they develop a huge resentment against God. And then others lash out at those closest to them. And often what happens is they somehow blame people around them for their pain. That maybe the other people should have done something to prevent the loss, or should be more understanding, but they begin to lash out. Now understand that it's often not rational. It's very irrational. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense when they're just venting and lashing out to try and reason with them. They will just take your reasoning, twist it, and lash out even more at you. So it's like you gotta give them a bit of space. Other people turn the anger on themselves, and they blame themselves, they beat themselves up, and they can just tear strips out of themselves. And then some, they just become very negative. They find fault with everything, everybody, and they are always complaining, always critical, and that's just where they go. And so you will have, if you have somebody close to you who is like that, you have to find a way of boundaries, giving them some space, and understanding and tolerating a certain amount of what they're going through. And it's a very tricky dance to be able to figure out. And what I would say is it's too hard for me to cover all the different scenarios, but you would probably benefit from a counselor that can just help you figure out how to deal with angry people who are grieving. It may pass, but if it doesn't and they get stuck, then you're going to need some help to know how to handle that. Okay, that's the emotional world. So part of that, you got sadness, depression, anger. But if you know this, you also had self-pity there. You also had beating yourself up there. You also had all kinds of irritability things going on. Hopelessness happening. So it can have all kinds of different emotional things, but sadness and anger are usually two where they start from, and they can go into other emotions. Now what can happen in your intellectual world is your brain starts going either, why did this happen? Or, what if I had done this? Or what if this had happened? Or what if they had done this? And your brain can be there for months and months and months. And you can spin and obsess and play over and over and over. So what's happening in your brain is it's trying to make sense out of the loss. It is thinking, if I can figure out why it happened, then I can deal with it. Then I can understand it and accept it. And so it is just trying to figure out the loss. But for many people from complex trauma, you can get stuck at this stage, especially if you're a very analytical person who's in your head a lot of time. And so you can begin to look for some great cosmic purpose in this. Or if you think in terms of, if you've ever watched a movie and the very end has this weird twist at the very end, and you find over the next couple days or weeks, you're going back over the movie, over and over, trying to figure out why that twist was there and making sense out of it. That's what's happening in your brain. It's trying to look at it from 100 different angles. But it can drive you crazy. It can keep you awake at night. It can get you just spinning, creating anxiety, obsessing to the point that you drive everybody else crazy. Now, some people, when they get to this stage, they just do all of this internally. Others, they got to talk out every obsessive thought. And if you live with that, you're looking for PX something at Health Science Center, because that is just really, really hard to deal with. And so again, you probably need help from an expert, a professional, to help you know how to respond to somebody if they're obsessively talking about it day after day. Something else that can happen, and it can be rational, but it can be irrational, is what we call bargaining. So let's say you lost your kids to CFS, or you lost a relationship. Your brain is going over, what would I have to do to get them back? And you're cooking up deals or bargains in your mind that say, if I did this, maybe they'll come back. If I do this, maybe they'll come back. And that's a natural thing. What you have to be careful of, you don't slide into trying to manipulate things to get them back. But there's an irrational part. Somebody may have died, and you know rationally they're not coming back, but there's still a part of your brain that's thinking, I wonder if there's a way I could get them back. Maybe if I promise God I'll go to church every Sunday, He'll somehow bring it back. And you go into these very irrational places. And then for others, in their brains, it is so painful right now, they just escape in their brain to a fantasy world. So they don't want to deal with anything. They don't want to feel the pain. So they use their brain to escape to a fantasy. So again, you got your emotions going all kinds of painful places. You got your brain going in all kinds of thinking places, but distorted and irrational places as well. So you have to be aware of that. And then you have to be aware that your thinking can influence your feelings, and your feelings can then influence your thinking. And so they can feed each other in a negative way. So that's part of the thinking and emotional piece. Now, you then come at some point to a place of acceptance. So you accept life without that person, or life without that very important thing in your life. Now, here's where it gets a little bit tricky. When we come to that very beginning where reality sets in, reality doesn't settle in totally all at once. Reality settling in is a very gradual process. So let me give you an example. Let's say, so my brother just lost his eldest son from a brain aneurysm a year ago. 2 weeks ago was the first year anniversary of his son's death. So he had come to a pretty good place up until 2 weeks ago, where he was accepting and grieving and getting through it, and then the anniversary hit. and it just hit him like a ton of bricks again. And then, shortly after, coming up in June, is his son's birthday. Guess what's going to hit him again? The loss of his son. And then Christmas will come. So every time you have a holiday or an anniversary, the loss hits you at a little deeper level. And it's like all of a sudden you just feel the loss in a deeper, more real way than you've ever felt it before. And so what happens at that point is, for many people, they go back to crying, depression, they go back to anger, they go back to why did this have to happen, all kinds of thinking, and it's like they start the process all over again. And then Thanksgiving hits, all the family gets together, son is not there, you go through it all again. So what will happen during the first year with all the seasons, holidays, and anniversaries is you will repeatedly go through the stages of grieving. Each time you'll get to a deeper and deeper place of acceptance. So that's why when you lose a person to death who's close to you, they say there's a minimum of a year. Because you got to get through the year with the seasons and anniversaries and holidays. And then the second year, it really hits you because you've got to that deep, deep place of realizing all the ramifications of losing that person. Okay, now here's what will happen. You come to that point of acceptance, and many people just get through that naturally. They're crying, they've got angry, they've thought, they've talked about it, they've processed it, they've given the time to think it through, go through all the seasons, and then they just accept it. And then just naturally they let go. They don't have to make a conscious decision. It's just like they're at peace with it. It's just the natural result of doing the healthy grieving. And that happens in many cases. Sadly, for people from complex trauma, that doesn't happen as much. So what will happen for many people in complex trauma is you go through all the emotions, all the thinking, time has passed, and somewhere deep inside yourself, you know that it's time to move on. You have a sense that you've come to a certain amount of peace with it, and it's the right time to now let go. But you have to make a conscious decision to do that. Now here's where it gets really tough, because part of your brain doesn't want to let go. Part of your brain is afraid to let go, either through guilt, either through your abandonment issues, either through facing life and all the fears you have around it. But you just say, brain, the time has come, I need to move on. Now, what will happen is that thought will keep popping into your head. Let's obsess today about them. Let's just hang on. And you have to say, okay, I can't stop the thought from popping into my head, but I don't have to feed that thought. I can choose to let go. I can choose not to feed the thought. That is very difficult. And many of you will need help to do that. You're not strong enough to do that on your own. So don't be afraid to ask for help. And that's one of the things we're going to look at next week, is most people from complex trauma can't get through the grieving process on their own. They usually need help to get them through the points where they're stuck. So let me just stop there for a minute. As I've been going through those 6 things, did you see kind of where you have gone in grieving in the past? And did you see the areas where you tend to get stuck and why you get stuck there? I hope you did. Because next week we're going to look in more detail about how to get through those times so that you can get unstuck and get through to the completion of acceptance and moving on with life. Okay, some people, like I said, they have trouble letting go because they are afraid to have fun again. They're afraid that if they have fun, that they're not missing the person and it makes them feel guilty, and so they feel they have to hang on so that they never stop being sorry or sad that the person is gone. Okay? Others, you can have let go of stuff, you have accepted it, you've moved on, but many people from complex trauma want to think, I will never be sad, therefore, about that for the rest of my life. Somehow, if I get through this process, I will be happy all the time again. Not necessarily so. I remember as a young pastor, I visited a family one day, and the lady's mom had died a couple years earlier. She had really worked it through very well, and it really come to peace. But she was, when I got there, you could tell she'd been crying. And I asked her what was going on, and she said, it's the weirdest thing. I was making toast this morning, and the toaster popped, and somehow the sound of the toaster reminded me of my last breakfast with my mom. And all of a sudden it triggered memories of my mom, and I was crying. That happens, and that's okay. So let me give you a couple pieces here. As you deal with grief, yes, you might have to recycle back at a birthday or at Christmas, but what you're going to find is every time you go through that cycle, the pain gets a little less. And there's more time between the cycles. It's like waves of grief. So picture waves of an ocean. In the beginning, those waves come rapidly and very predictably. You're sitting there one moment, you're crying. Then you get a wave of anger. Then you get a wave of guilt. Then you get a wave of fear and hopelessness. Then you're crying again. And the waves keep coming. You work on it, the waves get further apart. And they're not as big. That is the gradual process of healthy grieving. And then it all begins to lead to what we call resilience. And what resilience is you take a child that's been walking, learning to walk, and they fall down. A resilient child gets back up and tries again. So resilience is the ability of a person who's fallen to get back up. But it's more than just getting back up. It's becoming better because of the fall. And so what happens with grieving is at first you just say, I hate that loss. It was the worst thing that happened to me. You go through the grieving process. Yes, it takes time. It can take a couple years. You get to a point where you move on, but then you begin to realize that loss has changed me for the better. I could have let that loss kept me angry and bitter and mad at the world, but I let that loss work in me, and I grieved it, and I healed, and now what? You know what? I am a more caring person than I've ever been. I'm a more humble, sensitive, compassionate person than I've ever been. How many of you have been very impatient with somebody who locked their keys in the car, or who forgot something for the 10th time, and then you locked your keys in the car? All of a sudden it was, oh my goodness, I so overreacted to that person when they locked their keys in their car. I'm just as human as they are. Humble pie time. And it can make you a better person. So that's resilience part 1. Resilience part 2 is when you've lost something, other people have lost something, sense that you get it. They sense that you understand their pain. And guess who they want to talk to about it? You. And many people who've gone through losses have said this: I wouldn't wish that loss on anybody, but in a way it has given me a new mission in life. It has given me an area of effective service where I can now help people because I've been there. I've been through the pain. I've healed. I get it. And I can now effectively help them. I don't know how many of you have gone through a psychologist or a counselor and you explained your addiction or your depression, and it's obvious they understand it by a textbook, but they don't really get it. And they are so frustrating because they give you book knowledge, but you don't want to hear book knowledge. You want the sensitivity and compassion from somebody who understands from their own experience. So that is the process of grief. So if you're at the anger stage, don't get down on yourself for that. That's okay. Just make sure you don't get stuck there too long. If you're in the sadness stage, that's okay. It's all right to cry, and it's all right to be sad and even depressed. Just make sure you don't get stuck there too long, and don't be afraid to reach out for help. Next week, I'm going to bring a whole bunch of other practical tools for grieving.